Namaskar viewers, hello and welcome to Sansad TV. I am Tina Jha, you're watching Perspective. So after more than 4 years of negotiations, nearly 200 countries have approved a historic deal to protect and reverse dangerous loss to global biodiversity. The agreement at the COP15 UN Biodiversity Summit in Montreal, Canada sets 23 targets and 4 goals aimed at safeguarding biodiversity. The most significant part of the deal is a commitment to protect 30% of land and water by 2030. Currently, 17% of terrestrial and 10% of marine areas are protected. The 23 targets in the accord also include cutting farming subsidies, reducing the risk from pesticides, and tackling invasive species. Besides, the deal also commits to progressively increase the level of financial resources from all sources by the year 2030, mobilizing at least $200 billion per year. Hailed as a landmark deal, it is being compared to the Paris Agreement, which is the international treaty on climate change to limit global temperature rises to 1.5 degrees Celsius. So with an eminent panel of experts, we'll analyze the key points of the biodiversity deal, the ambitious targets that it has set by the end of the decade, and some of the concerns of developing countries that it has not factored in this particular deal. Joining me are 3 distinguished panelists. Pleased to welcome on the program Ms. Urmi Goswami, senior journalist. She writes extensively on issues related to environment, sustainable development, also climate change. Ms. Archana Chatterjee, she's program manager at International Union for Conservation of Nature. And Dr. Shekhar Kumar Neeraj, Principal Chief Conservator of Forests, Biodiversity Conservation, Government of Tamil Nadu. Thank you to all my panelists and welcome to this edition of the program. Ms. Goswami, let me begin the program today with you. Let's first, get an overview from you on this historic deal, which is the first of its kind when it comes to protecting and safeguarding biodiversity. What is the biggest takeaway for you in this particular deal?
Well, the biggest takeaway is that I wouldn't say this is the first time. You had the Aichi targets in 2010, except the Aichi targets where you had the targets, but you didn't have the money. I think this is a little better sorted out in the sense that you have got a set of targets. You're also talking about money. None of it is nobody walked away from the deal super happy. As the representative from Namibia said, the fact that everybody walked away from it unhappy is the only way to reach, it seems to be the only way to reach an agreement in the UN system. So what makes it significant as a agreement is the fact that all countries, all 196 parties to the convention on biodiversity agreed, that we have not exactly been stellar guardians of biodiversity. There is a need to halt and restore biodiversity because that is the only way we can protect the world that we live in.
Right.
Without it, we are sitting on the branch of a tree and cutting it. So that recognition, the setting of targets, which some of them are ambitious, they're also realistic. Take into account the fact that there are countries that may not be able to match up at that speed that it needs to be done. But there has been a conversation on digital sequencing information, which is basically how do countries which have where most of this biodiversity resources are benefit from this and not just let countries who are developing these resources benefit. That's a conversation that we have started that has been going on, but now we'll have a trust fund. That trust fund should be completed by 2024. That's when the next COP, biodiversity COP will happen. So that's again progress. On the money, yes, it's not a separate fund like developing countries wanted, but it's a compromise, as in it is a separate fund under the existing global environment facility.
So I'll come back to you and understand more. I'll come back to you and understand more on the funding mechanism that has been agreed upon. But let me go across to Ms. Chatterjee, get her point of view on the deal, the landmark deal that is being hailed by countries worldwide. Ms. Chatterjee, how do you look at the biodiversity deal? Is it a bold move forward when it comes to safeguarding biodiversity, protecting nature, and pushing humanity more towards living in harmony with nature?
Yes, surely. On behalf of IUCN, we really welcome the post 2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, which marks an important step in the right direction, even if we have not gotten as far as we would have wanted to, which my previous panelist also was mentioning. IUCN particularly applauds the commitment made to conserve at least 30% of the terrestrial inland water and coastal and marine areas, specifically with respect to people's participation. We all know that protected and conserved areas have reached a kind of plateauing in most of the countries, and indigenous communities at the mention of protected areas, they get a bit worried. So I think the other effective area-based conservation measures, or as we call OECMs, they are going to play a very, very important role in achieving these 30 by 30 targets by all countries. In context of specifically IUCN, we really welcome the inclusion of some of the IUCN tools, global tools, such as the Red List Species Index, Red List of Ecosystems as part of the headline indicators. And we would look forward to working very closely with the countries, in India also, we would really welcome to work with MOFCC to see how our global databases can help at the state government and at the central government level to report really robustly into this, because what is not monitored, what is not measured is not seen and understood by people. So therefore, it would be very important to monitor the progress towards the achievement of these 23 targets.
Clearly, Dr. Neeraj, the fact that 30 by 30 can be effective and successful only if countries, individual countries, do ensure the kind of progress that is expected of them. So, in that aspect, if I could understand from you some of the significant steps that we as a country, and particularly if you could also share your perspective on how it's taking place in Tamil Nadu, what are we doing to protect, safeguard biodiversity in India?
Thank you. 30 by 30 may probably still be a arbitrary, probably selection of the percentage proportions. I'll not really get too much into it. But what I would rather try to trace back to the little bit, that is the origin of the entire concept of biodiversity conservation and sustainable use and community participation. So 30 years have passed, 1992 Earth Summit, and now 2022. In 30 years, and if you look at a report parallelly to this is the WWF report of Living Planet, and then it was alarming. And we did discuss in one of these discussions some time back. And that says that there's a 69% decline of species. So there was a target there also. There was a target at Aichi target later stage. And there are sustainable goals also. 17 of them are there. But in terms of measurability, if you look at them, then I find that what is being done, quite much is being done. I would admit and feel happy about it. But I think that this is also a time when we have to probably little bit be more stiff in our specificity of the targets, and then mechanism, and then the strategies how to achieve them. Because simply by fixing a target and the goals and objectives, I am not a very strong believer in those kind of imaginative target. Now, second in the perspective was you asked at how we are doing. In Tamil Nadu and India as a whole, I think we're into the same situation there. Community participation was to be a very important hallmark of the entire approach in this particular narrative. But then reality, I keep going to the ground, and so when I go to and interact with the community at panchayat level, at very grassroots level, and I find, because I'll say the protected area is still quite protected. We don't have to really a lot to worry about them, but then the biodiversity that exists, and quite much of amount of that exists outside the protected areas, where the communities have got direct and active roles in conserving and also utilizing them. there I find then there are serious issues of concern. We are trying to address them, and at a national level, if you look at that, then I think there's quite much challenges exist there, and I think therefore, as a nation, as a country which is also committed to the agreement here, I think we need to probably sit down and look at our own strategies so that we are able to make substantial progress. And I'll say that is historic in this sense that at least, in my perspective, I put like this: any international agreement of this scale is complicated, and I have also participated in some of them, even in Montreal also, and this is very complicated. So 25% goes to that. If we achieve a global view, a global agreement, and then the countries are agreeing and signing it, I say 25% has been done. The next 50% is how to implement and how do you strategize. And then the remaining 25% is you monitor, change the courses if needed, and then you do your own feedback, and then you take steps. I said this 50%, which is how do you strategize and achieve those goals and the targets, is that, I mean, this 50% is extremely critical. So 25% achieved now. Maybe probably we need to little bit more work out on the financial mechanisms and the funding prospects and which of the countries is going to really contribute to it. But then this by and large is achieved because the countries have agreed. But this 50%, which is our own work in each nation, how do we sit down and then look at the whole scenario and then looking at our own situations, developmental.
Right, that's a very important point of monitoring, strategizing, and setting our own goals. Ms. Goswami, the fact that towards climate action, India has indeed taken some bold steps. We've set ambitious targets for ourselves. What are our plans and action plans when it comes to safeguarding biodiversity? Do we have a national plan when it comes to this particular area, or is it interrelated to the larger umbrella of climate change itself?
Well, on our national plan, National Action Plan on Biodiversity, there is an effort. I think they were still working to finalize it, but clearly, when we talk about biodiversity, there's one thing that we should not forget. Human beings are also part of biodiversity. We are not outside of it, and therefore, when you start talking about what is the plan for biodiversity, there cannot be a single plan. When you talk about improving air quality, that is part of biodiversity. Talk about water, that's part of biodiversity, because it's not just water pollution, but you're talking about safeguarding hydrological systems.
Right.
When you're talking about safeguarding hydrological systems, we are talking about safeguarding forests. We are talking about all those drivers of which eventually become drivers of climate change. So are we cutting down our forests to farm more? That's an issue as well. So biodiversity is literally the big umbrella, and there is no silver bullet. That's the reason why you see this whole thing about 23 targets. It's not when we talk about climate, if you realize it's much simpler in terms of targeting. You put out there are fewer targets we talk about. But when it comes to biodiversity, there's just the range of things that we have to talk about is completely, it's enormous. And yes, we need a plan. We need a plan that talks to each other, which seems to be always a bit of a problem. The other aspect, I think, when it comes to the Indian context, and it's a conversation we need to have very seriously, is to realize that India is a biodiversity hotspot, right? And we need to understand, even if we were not a biodiversity hotspot, we need to understand that nature has value. Nature is not, just something that's lying there free for use. There is value to it. And that value needs to be factored in when we are taking other decisions. So
Absolutely.
Literally, the idea of where you set up an industry, we always think about, yes, we have a certain value we give to forests, that's good enough. Is it truly the value we are giving? Because there is a value to having sort of intact ecosystems. Are we actually factoring in the value of biodiversity, of nature, when we are talking about making other decisions. So I think what India needs to do is have a plan, have a serious conversation on how you value nature. So treating nature as an asset. And this is, I mean, yes, it is not an easy task, but it is not an impossible task. There are many such sort of efforts that have been attempted, either within the UN, outside of the UN system. You had Sir Partha Dasgupta's Economics of Biodiversity, which by itself is a mammoth volume of work, voluminous work that he has put together, actually, which was geared for this COP15. And then there's Sir Partha Dasgupta's work on green accounting, which is geared for the Indian context. I think it's time we start treating nature seriously.
You're right.
And
the fact that, the bottom line is, Ms. Chatterjee, that it is going to be a collective effort. We can't just expect the government to come up with a plan and then we follow it. The fact is, nature is something that we have to all protect for our own good, for our future generations, and therefore all of us have to collectively work towards preserving and restoring the damage that we have sort of caused to nature. In that aspect, how can we encourage more and more community participation? It shouldn't be difficult in a country like ours.
Yes, you're right. When we talk about 30 by 30 target, it is good that we will create this network of protected areas, be it OECMs or be it corridors or whatever. But I think some of the targets are talking about the rest of the 70%, which are impacting these 30%.
Yes.
Where we are holding our biodiversity, so to say, intact. We want to protect everything that we have, the natural capital. But it is actually the other 70% which we have to bother about more, which is impacting this 30%. So absolutely right. Without community participation, this 70% will never stop impacting that 30%, which we want to conserve. So community participation is absolutely a must. And I think in the concept of OECMs, that is ingrained, that the community takes care of the biodiversity areas while deriving livelihood benefits out of it. So if we ensure that biodiversity is providing livelihood benefits to communities, then community participation is not going to be very difficult. The problem arises when community sees biodiversity as a competitor,
yes,
which is impacting its development prospects. So that is where we need to really work such that the land use changes are not so drastic that they eat away into our conserved areas. So I think from that perspective, this deal, the historic deal as it is being called, is very important, that it includes the aspirations of the indigenous rights and aspirations of indigenous people and local communities, under the target 3. And therefore, I think all countries, and especially in India, it should not be an issue, because even in our protected and conserved areas, the PAs, the people's participation is really under the Forest Right Act. It is important. And one more point I would like to highlight: the Honorable Prime Minister's Lifestyle for Environment campaign. It's a movement, global movement that he has initiated. I think that is again going to be a key kind of a milestone or a pathway for us to achieve both our climate goals as well as biodiversity goals.
Right. Dr. Neeraj, the fact that, we've been talking about it now because there's a deal, but biodiversity loss has been a problem which has not suddenly come to us. It's something that we've been discussing over the last decade or so, and we've been talking about how we have to expedite efforts to undo the kind of damage that we have already caused to the environment. What are the challenges that we face when it comes to spreading awareness, in enhancing community participation? These are areas that should be done, but what are the areas where we are falling short? And now, because we have set a target for 2030, we need to sort of now expedite them in order to, achieve the desired results.
The biggest challenge is how to really integrate the communities. I'm finding, that we say that, because the original philosophy and principles of the CBD convention also was sustainable use and fair and equitable sharing. But that actually did not happen effectively. So I think, and why it's not been really finding so difficult to integrate the communities. I think multiple reasons are there. Can't just say one or two, but they say that awareness of the community about the benefits that they can derive through the market mechanisms or otherwise is very, very low. Second, they don't find any real termed incentives lying out for them. So what's the problem is that they say that we protect that, or we conserve that, or we keep the green areas, or we sustainably use a medicinal plant for what? We get pittance. Somebody else gets huge amount. Why should we struggle for it? We have so many other things also to do. So incentivizing the community in direct and real sense, and that should be quick enough, and that should be really fair and equitable. If we are able to somehow work out that mechanism, I think, and then that will create a kind of a great amount of induction effect. So people will get induced, more and more groups will get induced, and they will start participating in both conservation as well as sustainable use. But that's a huge task. We have a community which is not, most of the places are not really very well educated and so literate, environmentally literate. They don't understand the market mechanisms. But then that has to be really brought closer, communities and the market systems and the economic system, whatever say the green economy or microeconomy or macroeconomy level. That efforts is going to be really huge.
Right.
It is humongous, but that has to be made if we really want to achieve a real great progress. And that is where I think it remains key. With India being a vast country and so as the other developing countries, if communities remain somehow detached from this system and this kind of the policy implementation, I think then very little hope will be there to achieve this. So that is going to be one. So what I said that in order to summarize that particular point, I said that creating a system of incentives which should be real, correct, measurable, quick, and then given to the people, to the communities who conserve the forest. That should be understandable. That is what we need to create, that system which is still not in there. Like we look at the biodiversity management committees, BMCs. If you see that, I'll say that in my own field works, and I find that 80 to 90% people don't even understand about their own rights, privileges, and about this act, the Biodiversity Act 2002, which is now 20 years old. So they don't understand, they do not understand, meetings don't place, don't have even seed money to conduct meetings. And they don't even know who is the secretary of that particular committee, whom to approach if they're finding somebody else is collecting some
Right. So a lot of areas that need to be taken
market.
care of in terms of spreading awareness, in terms of enhancing community participation, in terms of strategizing and monitoring the kind of action plan that is needed. But the larger picture, and Dr. Neeraj rightly mentioned the fact that there has to be coordination among states in India, among countries globally, if we want this deal to achieve the desired outcome. And for that, Ms. Goswami, there have been contentious issues, especially related to the funding. And you were mentioning earlier on how there was a lot of discussion over the developing countries demanding a separate fund coming in from the developed world, whereas what's been agreed upon is quite different. So how does the existing mechanism address the concerns when it comes to the funding aspect? Because clearly, if the developing countries do not have the required financial resources, all will remain mere words and no action can actually be expected from them.
Okay, so there are two quick parts to it. One is, of course, the quantum of funding. Now, experts have shown that the gap in funding is roughly about $700 billion a year. What the flows that you have is about 150 billion. So 800 billion is what's required and 150 is what you have. So there's a gap of 700 billion. Now, filling that gap is the big issue. And the fight that happened, the negotiating difference were over two things within that. One, of course, is creating a separate fund. Two was where that money was going to come from. The developed countries said all resources, which would include domestic, private, and as well as overseas development assistance, grants, loans, what have you. And the developing countries maintain that this should be in keeping with the convention, public funding that goes from developed to developing. So the 30 billion that they have agreed to do till 2025 is 30 billion annually till 2030, is basically from public funding. Is that enough? Of course, it's not enough. But we are moving the scale of the conversation, and this part of the conversation. I think we need to have an internal, honest conversation. Is that within our country, how are we diverting money towards biodiversity or towards nature, and where are we accessing that money from?
Right.
Even domestic money, where are we getting the private funding from? How are we getting companies to be more responsible and paying for what they're doing? That's a conversation we need to have internally as well. So that's one part of it. The political fight about the responsibility of developed countries to support work in developing countries, this is going to continue till we are able to have a certain kind of a system. I think that that also should be work in progress. As for a fund, look, let's be very honest. We can make many new funds, but what matters really is the money that goes into the funds. And I think making a fund is more about a political victory. We saw that in the climate conversation. The creation of a loss and damage fund is a political victory for developing countries. In this case, there was a compromise which I must mention came actually from another developing country.
Right.
When things were getting out of hand. It was Colombia's proposal. So yes, the point that developing countries finally made very clearly is that, look, you want the 2020, the post-2020 global diversity framework to have targets, to be more stringent, but you require the money for that. And for that, we need separate funding. That's exactly what it was.
That's, I think, the most important point, because each time we talk about outcome, finance will remain at the core. Each time these negotiations happen, there will be this kind of conversation that will take place between the developing and the developed world. But what's significant is that there's been a compromise. There's been a fund within the GEF, the existing mechanism, and to make it more faster and efficient is what has been the response to it. So let's see how, the deal actually works out, how these targets that have been set are actually met by the end of the decade. That perhaps will be the victory for this deal. So with that, I'll have to wind up the program. Time is running out. Thank you to all my panelists for joining us on this program and sharing your thoughts, your views with us and our viewers. And to you viewers, thank you very much for your time as well. I'll see you same time tomorrow. Take good care of yourselves. Keep watching Sansad TV.